Hello, my name is Darsha Narvaez at the University of Notre Dame, Professor Emerita of Psychology and host of evolvednest.org. This is a recording of the talk I gave on November 2nd to the ECFC. It's going to be extended a bit too. I'm honored to be able to share my discoveries with you, discoveries that are at the same time distressing but hopeful. This is integrative work that, in a way, mirrors the integration of my ancestry. My mother was a Minnesota farm girl with German and Eastern European heritages. I look like her, except for my hair, which is Puerto Rican. My father was born in the mountains of Puerto Rico, Jayuya, and I learned to speak the language of one of his ancestries, los conquistadores, el español. But I learned next to nothing about his other heritage, the indigenous Taino peoples. My aim in my research in recent years has been to integrate indigenous wisdom into my life and into my work. And what I present here is part of that aim. What I would like to suggest to you is that you watch first the film. This is a 6-minute film on what happened to us. How do we get to this state of illness, ill-being, ilth? And you can either use the QR code here or click on the film here or the link and come back in 6 minutes and we'll be right here. So just pause the recording and go and watch the film. So now I'm going to shrink my face and let's go on. Those of you who perhaps did not watch the film, let's at least give you the overall picture of what's discussed there. For most of human species history, we've been around for 2 million years or so. We existed in cultures of cooperative companionship, and it's only a few but now the dominant culture of the last few thousand years that has put us into cultures of competitive detachment. And so it creates all sorts of illness in humanity, in all our kin, animals, plants, and planetary ecologies. And we are full of unwellness everywhere and is spreading. This is just a list of things of human well-being in the US. USA exports its ways to the world, so that's why it's important to pay attention to what's happening. And then the list of things of how we're breaking down planetary well-being. I'm not going to read any of this to you. You can look through them, pause the recording if you like. So, what is it we have forgotten about wellness? Well, we have to know what our species typicality looks like. What is that, heritage of 2 million years? It's full of wisdom. 99% of our history was spent in nomadic foraging communities, and they practice what I'm going to talk about, which is the evolved nest. And that is where we get a culture of cooperative companionship, starts with the evolved nest. It's rooted in nature's laws, in nature's gift economy, very earth-centric. And this knowledge is built up over generations from traditions and observation and revelation. The cultures that are nested foster human thriving and flourishing, not only for people, human people, but all our other people, persons on the planet, the animals and plants as well. So it's about holistic development of body, heart, mind, spirit, and community. Relationships are fundamental to well-being. And again, that means not only humans, but our relationships with non-humans, other than humans, more than humans. And in these communities, virtue is fostered from the bottom up. It's not something that you force on people or actually can force. and it's maintained through story and ceremony, daily reminders of our place on the planet. So balance and rebalance our daily endeavors. What is our wellness pathway? What can we recognize in these societies that are nested, that provide for basic needs? That's what they start with. The community meets basic needs through the evolved nest. Child well-being is a central concern. It's a sacred responsibility. And throughout this pathway, connectedness is maintained. People never feel disconnected from others, from nature, from themselves. Connectedness is fundamental. And this meeting of basic needs then promotes health and thriving in individuals, but then also fosters a community that is heart-minded, the individuals as well. And these outcomes then are also related to a know-how for living holistically, for living compassionately and regeneratively on our earth. So what are those basic needs? If we look at each of those pieces, wellness step one, we can see, well, we know we're animals, right? We don't like to think about it, but yes, we are animals and we need nourishment, warmth, protection, and safety, a sense of competence wherever we are, whatever we're placed on the planet. We're mammals too, and we need a lot of affection and play and inclusion to grow well. We're social mammals, so we especially need social bonding, extensive bonding with multiple others, with social enjoyment being built into our body, mind, and spirit from those experiences. So we need community support and apprenticeship in adult activities throughout life, always looking to those who are a little older to learn how to be a member of the community, how to fit in well. We also are humans and we have special needs for immersion pretty constantly in a communal life, not isolation, by yourself in a room or a crib or a playpen, for example. We need interbeing experiences with multiple elders. Always those elders we look to them. It's a natural pedagogy to look to those who are a little bit older and learn so easily from them because they're so interested in us too. And we need to make meaning. We have to have stories that guide our lives. If we're not told them, we'll go find them, we'll go create them. So we need our ancestral stories to help us. And through all this, we self-actualize. We organize ourselves, our being around our experiences. And because we're humans and make choices and can make mistakes and get out of balance and let the ego get big, we need healing, daily healing and restoration of our relationships and our health. So the evolved nest is really what promotes resilience, and it helps each child build and reach their unique potential. So these are the 9 components we've been examining in my lab. There's probably more things we could put on this list, on this flower, make it very large for what the evolved nest includes, but these are the things that we can find data for and in science, and modern science, and the history and what it looks like in our ancestral kind of communities. Now you think about basic needs, I think, and you'll immediately, what comes to mind is Maslow, right? And his hierarchy. And that's sort of illustrated on the left side there. He was actually inspired to go in this direction in his research by the Blackfoot Nation. He spent a few weeks with them and just noticed, wow, there's no neuroticism. People are happy. People are well. What's going on? And so he shifted away from being an experimental psychologist in laboratory science to trying to understand and promote well-being. Now, it turns out, though, that he kind of got things upside down. Look on the right side. What's fundamental? Self-actualization, right? And where is that on hierarchy of Maslow? It comes late, doesn't it? You got all these other things to do, all these other aspects of the pyramid to build first. No. All that builds self-actualization. So the evolved nest is part of meeting physiological safety needs, belonging and love needs, esteem needs, and so on. And they're not to be split out and separated and be in an order. They actually are fundamental to building self-actualization of the child in a healthy way. And notice then on the right side that self-actualization, that's not the end point, individual, thriving. It's community actualization so that the community stays into the future, exists into the future, perpetuity. And that culture and that community always includes the bio community, the animals and plants, waterways and landforms and soil, wherever the people are. So the First Nations perspective, it's very centralized to a particular location and duty and responsibility there. So Maslow got something right, but then he kind of didn't. So if we look next, then what does the meeting basic needs lead to? Well, it's human thriving. That sense of well-being that we can see. This is what you can observe when a person is thriving or flourishing. They have a quiet mind, inner happiness. They're vital and fully alive. They're autonomous. They make their own decisions. They're honest. They don't have to deceive. They have a sense of humor that's not a put-down humor, except in a teasing way. Outstanding memory, building habits at will. They know how to get along in the landscape. They have ecological attachment to that place, and they're connected to spirit. So they have an awareness of reality beyond what you can see, touch, or measure. And then on the right side, what do they look like in relationship? They have an extended self. They have a sense of being one more than me in this skin. I am one with the community members. I am one with the natural world. This is a place of we, not me. So they enjoy being with others. They enhance the well-being of others. They're relationally attuned, empathic, listen unconditionally. They're communally oriented. They help authentically. They're unconditionally forgiving and loving. They're generous, egalitarian, by and large. Once in a while, the ego might inflate. Oh, I did a good job on that. Wow, the big hunter, and their fellow hunters are going to tease that hunter until that big ego pops and he comes back to earth and is one of us again. Otherwise, he can become dangerous, they say. And then there's respect for ancestors and future generations and a general responsibility towards the web of life. That's the second phase. Why is that? How do these two pieces fit together? Well, in early life, body, brain, and mind development is happening so quickly. Our babies resemble fetuses of other animals till about 18 months of age. And so millions of synapses are growing, and the baby's just a big learning machine. Whatever they experience is going to be imprinted and put into their memory bank and affect their trajectory. So their needs need to be met quickly to foster a well-functioning brain, because you want to keep the biochemistry in a positive, optimal state so that you're growing the things that are scheduled to grow. There is a lot of sensitive periods for different pieces that are layering up over the first years of life. And if they're under cared for, if they're in distress, those things may not develop at that time. And then there's a gap. And the gap in brain development may not show up till later, till adolescence or adulthood, when they are suicidal or anxious or depressed. And so it's really important to provide for basic needs all along the way and not distress a baby. Babies are self-actualizing then. They're building their personality, they're building their health, they're building immune system and oxytocin system and the vagus nerve, all from experience, right? And so you want that to be optimal experience, and that's what the Evolved Nest provides. There's a constant interaction between nature and nurture. You cannot separate them, because the baby's a different baby every few minutes, right? A million synapses have just developed. Wow, different baby. And so it really matters each moment what they're experiencing, because they're turning genes on and off. That's epigenetics. And if you don't have the right experience at that time for the sensitive period for a particular set of genes. Those genes may never get set properly. And for the rest of your life, as shown in rat studies, you can be anxious because you didn't have that nurturing care in that sensitive period. You can be anxious unless you get drugs. That's Michael Meany's work. So we are really developmentally plastic, especially in early life, and we get less and less plastic with age. So it's really important to set our dynamic system of the self, the individual, up in a positive direction, because that's setting the trajectory for health or not so good health. We are biosocial creatures. Our biology is very much shaped by our social experience, and our social capacities are built on that biology that was shaped by our social experience. So human babies really need a womb with a view. Exterogestation, that's Ashley Montagu's term. And it's a biology of love. A loving nest then shapes the biology of being loving, that child being loving. They become what they experience. Boys are particularly affected by early life because they mature more slowly and they have less built-in resilience. So they need more of the nest, more of these features I'm going to talk about for longer. So they need more play, more affection, more breastfeeding, more responsiveness, more mentoring. These are the things that we have to remember when we integrate sciences in observation and tradition. What's the child doing in those early years? Well, they're building a way to be in the world. There's self-regulation systems of all kinds are being established. So the stress response, if you leave a baby to cry and routinely or to get extremely distressed, they are now shaping that to be the parameters for their stress response, and they'll be more easily put into that extreme state than if you kept them calm. Then they never learn to even go that far, right? So you want to keep babies calm and optimally aroused, to not be anxious and to not be kind of dead to the world, right? You want them there resting if they need to rest, but socially connected as much as possible. So social fittedness, they're figuring that out, how socially fitted to be and what that means, how to synchronize with others. All sorts of nonverbal skills are developed before language comes into play, and many, many layers. Daniel Stern's work there. They're monitoring their emotions, their affects, and figuring out what feels good and what doesn't feel good. If a baby's been always stressed by the relationships they have, well, maybe they'll get, they like their teddy bear better. You feel cuddly with a teddy bear, but not with people because that's your experience, for example. So a hospital baby, for example, that's separated from mother after birth goes and is feeling, disconnected because they're not supposed to be disconnected, but they have a blanket around them and they start to feel attached to the blanket, right? They're attached to their security or transition objects, which, we don't see those in our ancestral context because we evolved to be addicted to people, to be addicted to relationships, not to things, not to screens. That's all artificially imposed because we've undercared for, unnested our children in the way that is species normal or species typical. So our activity level is also set in those early years. Are we going to be open to newness, or are we going to be kind of scared of it? This is what is all these things are facilitated by healthy supportive systems. The evolved nest provides those things. And then the cognitive development as well, whether the child is going to be oriented to looking out for the novel, making it familiar, or will just shut down and move away from it. So for all these things, ongoing connectedness is necessary, and the evolved nest provides that. One aspect that really is important to understand is that the right hemisphere is scheduled to develop more rapidly in the early years of life. This is Alan Shore's brilliant work. Well, what do we know about that right hemisphere? Well, generally in our adult brains, it's integrated with the rest of the brain, the subcortical systems. And so it's able to, you know, react to and coordinate those pre-verbal, pre-human aspects of our brain. It's also oriented to the external world. It's able to take in the energy out there, take in the beauty, take in, you know, changes. It's fine with change. It's oriented to change and such. The left brain is not. The left brain only knows itself. It's only integrated with itself, wired to be itself. Um, and it doesn't, it likes dead things. The research shows when you numb one side of the brain or the other, the left brain just likes things to be static. You know, it can't deal with dynamism and movement and oh my God, just tell me what category it's in, right? And I'm going to be able to manipulate it. That's what the left hemisphere is oriented to. So you need a really good corpus callosum, which is the part of the brain in the center of the brain that coordinates, integrates both sides of the brain. In neglected boys, that coordination is diminished. The corpus callosum is very thin, so there's less integration of the world, the left brain, right brain, the world, the internal, external, all that. And that leads to then flipping into different states more easily and all sorts of problems. So it's really important, again, to give boys that external support system of the nest so that they are growing the way to integrate the brain. Girls have more built in, right? They have thicker corpus callosums to begin with. The other thing about the right hemisphere is that initially it's the seat of self-regulation, the vagus nerve, for example, the 10th cranial nerve, which is innervates all the major systems of the body. Early experience shapes that brain to be well-functioning or not. With undercare. And so it's vital to make sure that you're providing the nest so that self-regulation systems are set up properly. It's also empathy is more right hemisphere oriented, higher consciousness, emotional, social intelligences. So all these things are rooted initially in the right hemisphere. Things get more complicated with development. What's interesting to know too is that our right hemisphere can grow throughout life when we are in social dynamic flow states. So that means when you play, and I always encourage people to play with children under age 7. They're ready to play and they're in the moment and they keep you in the moment or they're going to stop playing with you if you start, looking at your phone or, daydreaming without them. So you've got to stay in the moment and that's going to grow your right hemisphere and these capacities on the left side there. And right hemisphere deficiency is associated with all sorts of problems that therapists try to help with and fix. And here's Ian McGilchrist's book, Master and His Emissary, which goes through all the research contrasting the two halves of the brain. So I encourage you to look that up or watch his videos. All right, then, wellness step 3 is heart-mindedness. These are peaceable mindsets that we see in our nested communities, right? Really good relational attunement, relational engagement, flexible ways of being with others face to face, being fully present in the moment, resonating with the other, treating them as equals, as reverently I-thou relationships, instead of seeing them as useful objects for whatever aim I have, I treat you as an it then. And in these circumstances, you have a small ego. It's not about me having my way. No, we're in this together as an interpersonal dance, and you co-create a new way of being with that new other. And these, of course, capacities are developed and primed by nestedness. On the right side is what happens when we build our abstracting capacities. We mature into using our neocortex more sophisticatedly. And you can see that it's communal imagination then, that our imagination, our thinking of possibilities is always about the community. It's not about me. It's about us. So there's an egalitarian respect that's deployed in action, a resonant responsibility, our personal agency, a sense of what I want, and my interest and need to be with others are flowing together. They're not in opposition. And we are building a compassionate orientation to the world. And these two capacities are co-constructed postnatally. We are actually set up to build these capacities, but we need experience to do so. And then wellness, step 4, is earth-centered living know-how. This is where we understand, because of our long experience of having our basic needs met, being in a thriving community, regenerative community, where we build all our full capacities as a human being, we understand that every creature is a part of an interacting dynamic whole because we experience it every day. All our relatives deserving of respect. And although Leopold, who was a wolf killer, renowned wolf killer for many years, suddenly switched when he looked into the eyes of a wolf he had just shot and saw the light dim, and he just questioned, he realized, what am I doing? What am I doing? And he came to build what he called a land ethic. And this is one of his statements. A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. And this is what you know in an earth-centered community. You live every day and you have know-how. You know how to implement this. It's not just in your head. It's not just intellect. It's your whole life. Now, I showed you the evolved nest earlier. This is the same list, except without birthing and breastfeeding, because all of us need to be nested throughout life in order to maintain that compassionate nature, that peaceable nature that I talked about, that I mentioned. And we all need to have that positive, welcoming climate and so on. So just keep that in mind as we go through the list of evolved nest components in a moment. So the path to wellness really is our cycle of connected cooperative companionship, which the movie, the little film, talked about. And in that cycle, then we have nested companionship from conception. And we'll talk about what the nest looks like in a moment. And that leads to healthy psychosocial neurobiology, which leads to adults with well-being and compassionate. They grow into compassionate wisdom. And then those adults build a community that attends to basic needs and respectful relations with all, including the earth, all earth entities, all our kin. And they keep the cycle going. This is our heritage. This is what sustainable earth-centric societies do. And this is what we can return to now that we know how important it is. People have moved away little by little from nesting their children, thinking that was better. So a lot of these decisions to go in the different direction, didn't have malintent, but now we know that it's important to shift. So the evolved nest then is about meeting basic needs. Every animal has a nest. We do too, and that's what we forgot, kind of, yeah. It's one of many inheritances beyond genes. Most of these characteristics are over 75 million years old. So that means they really work. They kept our ancestors alive. That worked across generations. And really, I call this the baseline for raising human nature, for raising human beingness. The information here, again, is transdisciplinary. Let's remember that these components are provisioned by a community, not just by mother. That's not our heritage. Not just by mother and father either. That's not our heritage. It's a village of care. And each of these components are showing love in action. So this is what love looks like. If you ask, how do you love a baby? Provide the evolved nest. And I call this the cultural commons for human nature. When we provide the nest, then we end up with that list of thriving capacities, because that's the way we're supposed to be. That's our nature. Every animal has a nature, right? Our nature is to be compassionate. Caregivers then are co-constructing through the evolved nest provision. Emotions and cognition in the brain, they're intertwined. The sense of self. Am I good? Am I bad? Are my relationships good or bad? Is morality, what kind of morality am I going to have? Is it going to be us against them because I never feel safe? Or is it going to be, oh, compassion? This is, you and I are one. We are brothers. We are sisters. We are kin. And so the social worldview is also established here in the early years. I'm going to emphasize those early years now, but again, remember that nestedness is for lifelong experience. I'm going to start with examples from anthropologists, ethnographers about our nomadic, mostly nomadic foragers, but other traditional communities also provide nest components. They haven't lost them, unlike the Western world. So Ugandan newborns, this was studies in the 50s comparing Ugandan babies born at home in the hospital with European and American babies born in hospitals. And the difference were stark, because American and European babies would be sleeping most of the time after birth, after a medicalized hospital birth. And then when they're awake, they're crying and crying and crying. I don't think a lot has changed. So Ugandan newborns born at home are never separated from their mothers, who massaged, caressed, sang to, and fondled their infants continuously. The mother slept with the baby, of course, safely, and breastfeeding mothers sleep safely with their babies. That's just the way it is. The research has shown, my colleague James McKenna. And the infant has control over feeding continuously at will. Often it's, every few minutes as a newborn. It's also, the suckling is very comforting, promotes the oxytocin system, promotes the vagus nerve being established well. So infants here are awake much of the time. They're alert, they're watchful, happy, calm, virtually never crying. And at 2 days, they're able to sit up, held by forearms, and they're finally focusing, staring intently at their mothers, and they smile and smile. Wow. And the Western worlds assume that babies do not smile till about 3 months. Yep. So why? What happened? What happens at birth? Well, in a wellness promoting birth, you're going to have a calm and welcoming environment during gestation, so pregnancy and birth and post-birth, following the natural rhythms of mother and child and sensitive to the signals of the child. Oh, we don't do that much anymore. In the Western world, it's been transformed over the last hundreds of years to be a technological birth that really is stressing baby and disrupting development and bonding. In fact, babies vary by how long they stay in the womb by about 55 days. But we choose a due date, right? The doctor kind of figures out, oh, this is a due date, and then they coerce the baby to be born on that due date. There are all sorts of labor things that go wrong, especially for baby. Well, mom can't move, so pain increases. So then she needs drugs, and then drugs impair the baby for weeks. The liver doesn't function well enough, and so they can't breastfeed after birth. They're just sluggish, and they sleep and sleep, right? And cry and cry. All sorts of medical routines are harmful, imprinting the baby with stress and disconnection, the smells of alcohol, the bright lights, the rough treatment, separation, vaccination, and other pain imposition, sugar water given to keep the baby quiet when they're in a nursery separated from mother, or when they're vaccinated, and so on. And that's, of course, seeding, imprinting the sweet taste of sugar, which I suspect has something to do with the sugar addiction that happens in advanced nations where this happens, where it's medicalized birth, as well as the microbiome being undermined by sugar water. And then there's stress hormones that prepare a child for birth actually stay active in these hospitalized birthed children. Entrainment of the mother and child, ready to glom onto each other, to mind meld, to physically, magnetically connect right after a naturalistic birth is all disrupted psychologically, physiologically, and then what we're seeding is inflammation in the baby from all that stress and depression and anxiety. So we have undermined baby's trajectory from the beginning of life when you have a hospitalized birth that's insensitive to all the effects of what they're doing, breastfeeding. So look at the lengths of breastfeeding here. On the left green column is our cousins, the bonobos, the chimpanzees, and that black line is the average age of weaning. So they're breastfeeding until around age 6. The blue next one, the blue column, are humans and the ethnographies that people have observed how much they breastfeed, how long, and that is beyond 8 years even, but the average age of weaning is 4 years old. Catherine Detweiler's analysis looked at the biology of breastfeeding, comparing all sorts of factors and how it looks across other species, and determined that we should be breastfeeding for 6 years. I'm letting your mind go, woo, right. So then James Prescott did a study looking at over 400 societies and looking to see which ones were peaceful, and found that 80% of the variance is explained by 2.5 years of breastfeeding plus being carried in arms in those first years. And if you look at no premarital sex, no sanction of it in societies, it explained 100% of the variance, 100% of peaceful societies. That's amazing. WHO, World Health Organization, recommends 2 years at least of breastfeeding. The American Academy of Pediatrics used to recommend 1 year. They've recently changed it to 2 as well. So that's the change in the colors there. Much could be said about breastfeeding. The milk changes with the needs of the child. It's different in the morning, different at night, different for boys, different for girls. If there's a infectious agent in the region, the breast milk will develop an antibody for it. It's full of body and brain building ingredients. We hardly understand it. It's analgesic, prevents pain, and antimicrobial and protective. So you don't want to have other foods with breast milk because the biofilm it provides, the digestive system will be broken then and allow infection in. It's related to a larger brain size, greater myelinization of white matter, which is linked to IQ, executive functions, and so on. And there's just greater development, happier, contented results. How about number 3? Touch that's moving and not negative. So positive, affectionate touch. E. Richard Sorensen, an anthropologist, observed what he called pre-conquest cultures all over the world, lived with them, filmed them, and this is what he summarizes. Infants were kept in continuous bodily contact with mothers or the mother's friends or on laps, always on bodies, even in any condition. When heavy loads were being moved, babies were not put down, they had priority. Loads could be shed or lightened, but babies were not put down, not deprived of constant, ever-ready, interactive body contact, even when the group is on the move under difficult conditions. So that's our heritage, constant bodily contact with infants. So why is that important? Why is it important to hold babies? Well, we have a lot of information about this now, a lot of animal studies as well as human studies showing that mammals need touch to grow and synthesize DNA. When you're not touched as a baby, your DNA synthesis slows down. So neglected children have smaller brains. Their skulls are smaller. They just don't grow as much. It's going to promote all sorts of adaptive arousal levels for sleep and behavior and wakeful behavior, exploratory activities, all sorts of good things, social and cognitive functioning. There are long-lasting health benefits, preventing excessive stress. So that's that vagus nerve again that has something to do with that. And the oxytocin system, well developed, prevents hippocampal dysfunction, which is related to memory, and prevents eventual depression. So there's a lot going on there. We find in our work that touch at age 4 months was related to lower incidence of behavior problems at 24 and 36 months, and that maintenance of touch over time. A lot of mothers stop holding their children after the first year especially, but we find that those who stayed affectionate have children with fewer behavior problems at age 36 months. Then negative touch. Negative touch, we have multiple longitudinal studies now showing their long-term negative effects. So people who are spanked, for example, spanking is actually empirically similar to physical and emotional abuse, the outcomes. What does it do? You're less empathic to others, to victims. You're more aggressive. And so you were, it's disconnecting, right? Negative touch. Number 4, welcoming social climate. And for a baby, this means just eliciting delight from babies. And this was a desired social norm. Attentive tactile stimulation was the daily lot of infants, lots of body, all sorts of things here to delight a baby. That's welcoming. Jean Liedloff, the continuum concept. She stayed with the Aquana for different periods of time. She's kind of an accidental anthropologist. That's a great book to read. This is what she says. The feeling that she noticed. The feeling appropriate to an infant in arms is his feeling of rightness or essential goodness, the premise that he is good, right, welcome. Without that conviction, a human being of any age is crippled by a lack of confidence, a full sense of self, of spontaneity, of grace. And what did the Dalai Lama say when he first came to the United States? He said, "What's wrong with everybody?" Because these things are not that common in the United States. Our studies find that adults who report more positive emotion in childhood are more secure. So their home health, their home climate was more positive than negative. They're more secure in attachment, mentally healthier, less stressed in social situations, and less likely to have a self-protective morality, that us against them morality. Vivek Murthy, our Surgeon General, has a book and a report talking about the lack of welcoming experiences in the United States, which is associated then with loneliness, which we have an epidemic of. How about number 5? Self-directed social play. Well, in our ancestral context, this is the Batek. The play is free-flowing. Children shape their activities as they go along. They're cooperative rather than competitive, and play is consisting of like-minded children having a good time, doing things together, much like the non-competitive adult activities on which most play was modeled. This is our heritage, play, 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 throughout childhood. So it should be the primary focus of childhood, not schooling tasks, right? This is how children are intending. Our species is meant to learn through whole body immersion and activities, imitations, learning by observation and then pitching in. That's Barbara Rogoff's work. What does play do? It influences all sorts of gene expression. Maybe 1,200 genes at least are turned on by play, fostering brain development and facilitates emotional regulation, including control of aggressive urges. In our reports, in our studies, we find maternal reports of play with themselves, of the child's play with the mother and adults, are related to preschoolers' empathy, inhibitory control, self-regulation, and concern after wrongdoing. As I mentioned, early play is really good for fostering emotional intelligence throughout life. But in the United States, there are reduced play opportunities in the last decades due to parent anxiety, not letting kids out of the house, due to screens, overuse of screens and video games and so on, and an emphasis on achievement. So how about multiple nurturers? Allo mothers is what the anthropologists, the term they use. This is the village of care. And the village of care extends to the natural world. So it's not just people again. So among the Mbuti, a Central African group, at the age of 3 days, the infant boy is learning that there's a plurality of warm bodies, similar in warmth, which is comforting, but dissimilar in smells and rhythmic movements. It's a plurality of non-aggressive models. We evolved to live in multi-generational, more than 2 generations, multi-age, multi-gender daily life. And you develop layers of attachments and connections, not just with mother and not just with mother and father, but with grandma and grandpa and auntie and uncle and siblings and non-siblings. So this is our heritage. What do we know from this research? We know that mothers need support to care well for their children. If they feel like the community is not supportive of them and their child, it's not welcoming the child, they will be, on average, less responsive. Their perceived social support is linked then to positive children behavior, social skills, and fewer behavior problems. And what we found in our work is that social support in those first 18 months predicted the child's prosociality at 2 years and 3 years old. In our ancestral condition, our nomadic foraging groups and similar nested groups, the ratio of caregivers to a young child is at least 3 adults to 1 baby, so that they always have, but it's usually more than that in the foraging communities, but certainly close relationships with at least 3 adults, typically mother, grandmother, and father, but others as well. And contemporary research has suggested that at least 3 people should be in love with a child, and that fosters well-being. So actually, we can agree with Stephanie Kuntz, who says children do best in societies where child rearing is considered too important to be left entirely to parents. Especially first-time parents. They're notoriously not that great unless they've raised their siblings or something. So they need a lot of elder wisdom and guidance. Number 7, responsive relationships. We have to distinguish here between babies and children. Babies' needs need to be met quickly before they cry. They're doing all sorts of things to signal their needs. They're starting to make a face, they start to wiggle, and then they start to get a little more agitated, and then they start crying, right? In traditional societies, you're moving in before the cry. And if you do hear a cry, oh my God, move in quickly, pick up the baby. Gilda Morelli and her colleagues say in the FA community. Melvin Connor, another anthropologist, reports that cries lasting 10 seconds last 10 seconds or less on average among the Khum. These are other Central African groups. So all our ancestry comes from that Central African area. So James McKenna, who studies infant sleep and breastfeeding mothers with Sleep Lab, he has suggested that it may be that babies who start crying, the young babies who start crying, just can't stop because they haven't developed a mechanism to stop. Just like they can learn to grasp things, it takes them a few more months to learn to let them go. That's why they love dropping things right around whatever, 10, 11 months. So there may be this wisdom that our ancestral cousins who follow the ancestral way seem to understand that quickly, keep the baby from crying very long or else they can't stop. Children age 4 and up are treated differently. They have their agents, they have autonomy. They might fall down and go, and people don't run in to take care of them so quickly because they know that they can manage now because they've been nested so well and so confident. They're very confident. 4-year-olds are going around doing adult tasks. So they trust the children after age 4. Now keep going here. So responsive relationships then is about reciprocal communication, the mutual influence. We know that in Western studies that mothers and children who have mutually responsive relationships are going to have better long-term outcomes for that child. They're more pro-social, they're more intelligent, they're more at ease in the world. So there's synchrony and repaired dysynchrony occurs, and that happens initially. The mother has to, or the caregiver has to repair dysynchrony because the child doesn't know how to do it yet, but then they learn, and so this is reassuring because mothers will get dysynchronous, and then the child will try to get them back. They learn how to do that in the first months. And the child has to learn over time more and more that the world doesn't revolve around them and their needs, right? But that's not to teach a baby yet. Wait till they're 3, wait till they're 4. Try to keep them in that optimal arousal orientation. So it's meeting baby's needs in the moment really is the responsiveness. That's the evolved nest. And all sorts of good things are happening from that. We control for responsiveness always because we know it matters for everything, and we control for it, and then we look at whether the other aspects of the nest matter. However, our dominant culture encourages unresponsiveness, right? Treat your baby like a machine. And these things, these orientations to being insensitive to babies have been going on for quite a while. In effect, culture trumps biology and evolution when this happens. Ian Suttie, a psychotherapist, wrote a book where he said that there's a taboo on tenderness in the United States. And yes, the film mentioned that. Here's John Bowlby, who says, although the overriding need of an infant child for love and security is now well known, there are some who protest against it. Why should an infant make such demands? Why can't he be satisfied with less care and attention? How do we arrange things so that parents have an easier time? Ooh, he says, in the meanwhile, we should be wise to respect children's needs and to realize that to deny them is often to generate in them powerful forces of affectionate attachment, demand, and propensity to hatred, which can later cause great difficulties for both them and us. And I think that's what we've done in the United States. We have a lot of dysregulated people, a lot of people who are fostering hate towards others, other groups. And why? Because we've undercared for them so long. We've traumatized them. We've led them to be this way because that's how they got their needs met, was to make a lot of noise. Number 8, nature immersion. In our ancestral context, everyone feels at home on the earth in their landscape. They're placeful. They're integrated with the rest of the natural world and fit into it. They know how to get needs met without too much harm to the rest of nature, and they ask permission to take life. They treat the natural world with respect as part of their web of relations. What do we know about nature immersion and connection in terms of our scientific research? Well, we know it fosters a receptive intelligence and caring relationships with the natural world. As Wendell Berry says, it all turns on affection. We destroy those entities that we don't love, right? So we need to learn to love our kin. Guided experiences help promote respect and honor towards the created world. And in individuals, it promotes mental health and it decreases stress. And we found in a study that we published that 3 weeks of nature nudging increased the empathy and mindfulness towards the natural world. However, we have increased nature deficit disorder in the United States. There's a study a few years ago that found that the average amount of time an American, a USian, spends outside per year is 24 hours. You imagine wandering to and from the car, I think. Number 9, the last one, routine community healing practices. In our ancestral context, these were regular routine. You could tell when people started to get snippy, for example. Katz talks about that. Then someone says, oh, we need a ceremony. And what happens is it's done in community. The community is the healer. And that's really vital. You're always connected, even when things are dysregulated, and together we can re-regulate ourselves. So these routine healing practices promote respect for nature, bonding of the community, they heal relationships, help individuals get back in balance emotionally, mentally, physically. And they're communitas, collective effervescence kind of ceremonies, but also grieving ceremonies. The San Bushmen, they're a culture that's been around for over 150,000 years. They carry our genetic inheritances. When they're asked how often do they have a grieving ceremony, they say, well, maybe once a week, but sometimes every day. And I think we can take this as a role model. We need to do a lot of grieving in the Western world. So that's the evolved nest. These are the 9 components I went through. That's the developmental nestedness. So developmental nestedness is about what's happening to that child and how it's affecting their well-being and their trajectory. But that's not the only thing for nestedness in these societies. There's also, I'm calling this deep nestedness, this combination of developmental with 2 others. Horizontal nestedness attends to our deep history, respects the ancestral wisdom, and honors the ancestors. And it also respects future generations. And then vertical nestedness, I'm working on all this now, follows the cycle of life, of Earth's ecologies, of Earth's seasons. It's an Earth nestedness. And then also there's a cosmic nestedness, a connection to the unmanifest, to the spiritual realm, to what cannot be measured. These are all aspects of our ancestral context, our ancestral wisdom, and what brings about wellness and well-being and cultural perpetuity. So horizontal nestedness, again, is honoring ancestors and future generations. Vertical nestedness is about fostering interbeing with Earth, Earthkin, the cosmos, all our relations. For example, the orientation is the world is not an external domain of objects that I look at or do things to, but is rather going on or undergoing continuous generation with me and around me. So we are part of a dynamic whole. Moderns imagine the world as an inanimate surface to be occupied. For many relational cultures, that we're talking about, to the contrary, humans and other beings inhabit a world that is alive. So this is sentience, the sentient planet, the sentient Earth. We practice then the honorable harvest. Again, that's asking permission and other ways of being. Robin Wall Kimmerer writes about some of the principles in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. So there's a way to contrast the dominant worldview with the indigenous worldview and look at the manifestations of the worldviews. This is my colleague, Four Arrows, Joaquin Petopa, And he has developed a list with 40 different, I mean, there could be more than that, but he has 40. And we have a book where we talk about 28 of them, dialogue about them. These are then, again, it's how you act in the world. People like to look at the right side, and it's really oriented to that integrated right brain way of being, comfortable with flow and so on. And the left brain is more obviously in that dominant worldview. And people will say, "Oh, I like the right side. Yeah, I like that. I agree." Well, it's not enough to intellectually agree, right? You need to also act on this. What do your practices look like? What does your workplace look like? What do the institutions look like? Which one are they following? And then over time, and looking at each one and contemplating, they'll see that much of what's manifested is on the left side. And why is that? Well, our dominant culture, emerging strongly from the 17th century on and forced upon everyone, it's really a colonization of every mind in all sorts of ways. We don't have time to go into how it all happened and how it continues. But that dominant culture views the cosmos as fragmented, disenchanted, and amoral. Doesn't really matter then what you do, right? And that humans are separate from nature. They're superior, of course. They're the pinnacle. Only humans have spirit, and only some humans really matter, right? So that hierarchy is built in here. The characteristics of the individuals, then, they're restless. They're homeless orphans on the earth. They don't feel at home where they are. They're trying to leave, escape from the earth. They want to control nature then according to abstract ideals. This is what we're told, right? You got to control nature, it will control you. We can outwit nature. And so that deep anxiety that's been seeded from the beginning of life, probably even in conception, which we didn't talk about, orients you to hoarding and consuming more and more and more. It's the Wetiko virus that Jack Forbes discussed, the cannibalism of life. And this is acceptable because humans are kind of not that great too. So there's this dualism going on too. It's all about competition and aggression, and that only the few will survive, right? Survival of the fittest. Now, our heritage, all our ancestors were on the right side here. And this is our baseline for our species, viewing the cosmos as unified, sacred, and moral, meaning that spirit pervades everything. We are mutually related with all, and we're actually the younger siblings on the earth in a sentient world. Even your cells have agency. Your microbiome has agency, right? So we're just kind of this younger kin that needs to learn from everyone else how to live well. In this viewpoint, in this orientation, in this worldview, you feel placeful. You're at home on earth. And in part because you've been raised in that place to know that place, to love this tree, these trees, this river, these mountains, and to be connected and responsible. Then you move with nature. You fit in with the landscape and the natural systems. And the evolved nest is a natural system. Reciprocal sharing then occurs with all kin, animals, plants. They're always aware that you are the spider in the middle of the web, and everything you do is reverberating across that web of life. Now, you see that I'm using the term indigenous worldview. Well, the way I see it, there are 3 ways to use the term, and Four Arrows and I in our book, Restoring the Kinship Worldview, mention these things. We're all indigenous to Earth, right? Wherever we are Earth creatures. There's also indigenous worldview, which is what I was just talking about. So it's a cosmology in action. It's how you behave, the understandings and assumptions you have that undergird your behavior. And then there's traditional indigenous knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge. This is different. This we need to honor because it's very specified and unique. Traditional ecological knowledge is place specific. So it's been coming through across generations as traditional knowledge, transmitted generation to generation in a particular locale. It's empirical knowledge too, but it's gained from observation, not from experiments that torture animals or plants and so on, or pollute. And it's also built from revealed knowledge, which is acquired through spiritual origins, recognized as a gift. So dreams and visions and such. Native American scholars have emphasized that traditional ecological knowledge represents the integration of person, place, product, and process, and that indigenous languages are vital because they transmit and interpret the worldview, values, conceptualization, and knowledge. So we need, all of us, to honor and respect traditional ecological knowledge in its pockets all over the world. That's the Native peoples, the First Nation peoples around the world who control their land base, also are fostering the vast majority of the biodiversity that remains on the planet. The United Nations report from a couple years ago, the 20% of lands that traditional Native peoples control hold 80% of the biodiversity. So we need to help them, support them in keeping their traditions going and not poo-poo them, which Western science, unfortunately, poo-poos traditional knowledge, poo-poos revealed knowledge, and doesn't want to wait for observation, right? Want to do experiments. So we have to get away from that scientism, the belief that only Western science can tell us anything. You need an experiment to see if breastfeeding is better than, or really better than formula, infant formula. Oh, look, infant formula, we put vitamin D in it. Oh, and this breast milk didn't have very much vitamin D. Oh, formula is better. So there's a lot of people that get all mixed up from these experiments that don't have a baseline. They don't understand what our species normality is for raising children, for optimal behavior, for thriving. So we get stuck. So we need to honor traditional ecological knowledge, to adopt the indigenous worldview, the kinship worldview, and move forward in a way that's responsible. So data from our lab, just a couple things I'll show you. Optimizing social development, because that's what we're about. These are preschoolers in 3 countries we looked at. I'm just going to show you the USA on one of our analyses. We were asking them about how much evolved nest the child experienced in the past week. So these are mostly mothers reporting. So we asked them about touch, play, and family togetherness. And you'll see the green line is this evolved nest in the past week. And we controlled for all these other things. You see responsivity, so important, right? So that's the left side is predicting what's in the middle, sociality, which is constructed by everything on the right side. All these wonderful things, attunement in the moment, social enjoyment, imagination, thriving, happiness. And we can see that the evolved nest, even after controlling for all these other things, is positively predicting their ability to be socially attuned and socially connected and showing well-being. One other image I'm going to show you, these are mothers in our longitudinal study. We asked them about their adverse childhood experiences, and we asked about their evolved developmental niche, we call it. That's the fancy term for evolved nest. We asked them about their experiences in childhood for both, and we tested their vagus nerve. And we see that the adverse ACEs affected negatively their vagal regulation, how well their vagus nerve is working, and the evolved nest history buffered that effect. So what happens when you move from a society and practices that look like these, lots of touching and holding and caring and responsiveness? to societies that look like this, lots of aloneness, being strapped in, not attended to, isolated, disconnected. Well, you've entered now the trauma-inducing pathway where the community does not meet basic needs, which means the evolved nest, right, not being provided. And you have ill-being, and that ill-being is going to be punished or drugged because, you want them to just conform, be quiet. And then you have the heart-spirit lockdown in the individual and in the community from that early toxic stress and from ongoing toxic stress. You build people with a lack of know-how for holistic, compassionate, regenerative living. Disconnection promoted all along the way, as I've pointed out in different ways. So every aspect of the nest to date now has been degraded. What do we know are the outcomes? Distress, extensive distress, layers and layers. So we're seeding dysregulation and ill health at every level: physiological, psychological, mental, social, moral, disconnection from self, others, and nature. And we really all have been colonized by the coercive authoritarianism of unnestedness. People don't, the focus is on money making, right? Not well-being, only economic well-being. Wherever economic well-being has gone, social well-being has diminished, ecological well-being has diminished. What happens then physiologically when the infant's needs are ignored? Well, it's early life stress, early toxic stress. Stress response gets out of line. Immune system isn't set up properly. You're seeding inflammation too. Endocrine system's not set up properly. Oxytocin system. You can see in the orphans, their oxytocin system, even after they've been adopted, if they've been an orphan for several years, oxytocin system doesn't recover. It doesn't work properly. Neurotransmitters, the number and function are affected. Emotions and emotion systems. I mentioned the corpus callosum, what joins the two halves of the brain, is also undermined. So there's all sorts of gaps or lesions. Early trauma, abuse, and neglect to this. And I say also undercare, the lack of the nest. What happens psychologically when early needs are ignored? Well, you're going to distress your own body. You signaled things that your body, you felt bad and you started to wiggle. Nobody paid attention. You started to, grimace and all that. And then you had to cry and then nobody paid attention. Well, boy, I'm not going to listen to this body. What's going on, right? You start to get dissociated from your body. You have an impaired sense of self, and you learn because people lived against you and try to control you. You live against them. You become socially disagreeable, irritable. That's what happens with a lot of stress. If you're stressed during pregnancy, gestation, the baby's going to be disagreeable, irritable after birth. That's what we know. If you're obviously, if you have traumatic birth, you're going to be irritable for all sorts of reasons, right? And that's going to make you more oppositional or withdrawing when you're with others. You're going to distrust the others and over time build not only anxiety, but cynicism, and demonize others who you have been told to scapegoat. And that makes you feel better because you have a reason for your feeling bad. Oh, it's those people that are making me feel bad, right? So what happens face to face is you get oriented dispositionally to protectionist social mindsets, to move into fight more easily. If you're left to cry as a baby and then finally someone comes, you're enhancing that reaction to needs, right? I'm just going to scream to get my needs met, right? And then you get aggressive if needed, because you've mobilized. What happens when the stress response kicks in is the blood flow shifts away from your higher order thinking and into your muscles to help you fight or flight. And you don't think very well. We know that the blood flow is shifting away from being able to think well. So your higher order thinking, your open-heartedness, open-mindedness is just gonna, decay, degrade. and you're going to feel right about reacting, because that's those primitive systems. The brain gives us those when we're born. These systems are in us to keep us alive. But what we do when we distress babies and undercare for them, you're enhancing these systems, and you're not growing those social capacities I mentioned earlier. So your aggression can be verbal or nonverbal or physical. Or you might socially withdraw because nobody responded to you and you just learn to be quiet and disappear to some degree. And then if you're traumatized, you might even go into numbness, emotional shutdown, disappear, and just be kind of a zombie, right? So these are things that can be then triggered. You're easily triggered into them if you've been distressed a lot in early life. It takes a lot of work to try to heal these things in adulthood. Then, when your imagination, your ability to think outside the present moment comes into play, you're going to end up oriented to one of these. I call it vicious imagination because it's fueled by those survival systems of fight, flight, fear, and anger systems. And these are the vicious imagination is about control. It's fueled by those survival systems, and the left hemisphere, which is all about anger. There's one emotion wired to the left side of the brain. That's anger. So these are the things that are going to be more easily triggered for you, and or detached imagination. This is where you use your head and you think logically and, in a serial manner, and, make up all these models in your head. And, oh, aren't you a smart one? You get a high IQ, for example. This is all, professors love this, right? You go in your ivory tower and you make up stuff, and then it doesn't matter if it works in the world or not. You just got a publication. And these are things where you're not tuned into your relationships. You're emotionally cool or cold, you categorize, stereotype, all this left brain stuff, objectify, dissect, decontextualize, seek control, empower. It's left brain, left brain. And you want certain answers, either or, black and white thinking, and you calculate utility, usefulness, and you innovate without a sense of consequence. So these are the dangers that we've just walked into, and pervasive now. Neuroception, this is a term from Stephen Porges. In every situation, we decide whether we feel safe or threatened. And depending on the answer, we just, in a matter of milliseconds, we shift into one side or the other. If we feel threatened, we're going to go into safety or defensive mode. And it can be very subtle, very, very subtle. And we're mobilized to be self-protective, fight, flight, or freeze, faint, depending. Be paranoid, and you brace against the other. And this is what's going to happen then when your early life is so distressing. You're going to be more easily pushed over here, more triggered on this side. On the left side then is what we would say comes about with evolved nestedness. You're going to be more open to life. You don't feel threatened. You feel confident and can attune to others, whoever they are. You're safe, right? Now the right side is really about trauma-informed practice to understand these patterns, right? And avoid triggering. That's not enough. We need to be focused on wellness-informed practices, which means we want to enhance our young, enhance each other. And so we need an understanding, which I've been trying to tell you what the wellness-informed pathway is. There's also conceptual framing up here. So if you've been told over and over, ooh, green people are dangerous, watch out. And then you see a green person, oh my God, you're going to go over on the right side, right? And that's the stories we tell really, really matter, because they're going to push us one way or the other. So if you're told every human being matters, every human being is important, then you're going to be on the left side, and you're going to rescue the Jews in trouble in World War II. That's what we find. And if you are told every entity on the earth is alive, the tree, the mountain, the river, you're going to be oriented to saving them, to honoring them, to respecting them. How about now? Well, encourage everyone, encourage everyone to be nested, to practice welcoming relationships, responsive caring and touch and play, multiple age relations, nature immersion and earth connection, healing practices regularly to rebalance, ideally in a community, but you can do it yourself, to honor ancestors of future generations, same comment, and to maintain a cosmic connection and earth-centeredness through ceremony. Every day you can do these things. And how about your attention? The one thing you certainly have control over is your attention. Even if you get triggered, you can learn to not attend to those feelings, right? This is what meditation helps you with, mindfulness helps you with. So we want to be in the right hemisphere form of attention. Not the left hemisphere wants to categorize and decide whether you are smarter than me or better than me or I am than you, and you're categorizing this and that, and who are you? No. The right hemisphere is about this, accepting what you are experiencing in the moment, receiving the life energy around you, seeing the beauty, connecting to the sentience, the aliveness, revering the uniqueness of where you are, enhancing the well-being of the other, whether it's a tree, whether it's a person, a human, whether it's a plant, an animal. The Sun Bushmen tell us that we should stop talking so much. We should sing and dance and play and life force energy. And then we embrace our earthiness and we accompany one another in the now. So I encourage you to do those things. Maybe we'll meet again and we can play together or sing together. We have many resources at evolvenest.org, Evolve Nest curriculum that can be done alone or with a community group. We have a child care checklist for young children, preschool, to see how much that child care center is supporting Evolve Nest principles. We've entered now the cycle of competitive attachment. We're stuck here at the moment. We have extreme social poverty in the United States, that's then oriented to undercaring for the young, developmentally inappropriate child raising, and we're planting layers of anxiety, and we create then people who are dysregulated, psychosocial, neurobiologically, and we have underdeveloped capacities, human capacities. And we end up with vices because you're dysregulated, and then you're told in school, you should act this way, and you learn a rule, but then in the situation, you don't follow the rule because that's just in your head, right? You follow your body, you follow your patterns of practice that you've had from a young age. And then we have adults who are not so well, have limited social moral capacities. They're more exclusive in their morality. That's against them. And they produce a trauma-inducing culture, continuing the cycle because they're distracted, they're overwhelmed, they're neglectful, over-controlling, because the system doesn't want us to be well. The system just wants to extract things from us, right? We're colonized. This is colonization cycle. And so you end up then with societies that look like this. They're focused on hierarchy, status, dominance. They're alienated from nature and relationships. They're kind of hungry ghosts. They spend most of their time in self-protection ethics. So all about me or mine, right? And their imaginations then they use for that viciousness of control of others to get them out of here, or, and then they're emotionally detached as well. So they flip between these potentially, and very little time in this engagement, peaceable mindsets that I mentioned. And because there's so much dysregulation, you have to have more and more laws to protect, to keep things going. And there's just a basic loss of heart in the society. Now, our heritage is thriving, and this is what thriving societies look like. They're more egalitarian, connected to a sacred web of life. They focus on harmony and balance with high autonomy and high communalism, And their engagement, their most of their time is spent in social engagement, an inclusive kind of engagement. And they use their higher consciousness for emotionally engaged imagination. They spend a lot of time in music, dance, and song, laughter, and no coercion, and very little time in that social self-protection of us against them. It's very rarely triggered. So this is our cycle of connected cooperative companionship, our heritage of 2 million years of this, nestedness, healthy development, well-being, and compassion. And the cycle continues when adults attend to basic needs and respectful relations. And we can intervene at every point, early childhood, parenthood, healing in schools of the children and the adults, and then change our communities so we are actually attending to human needs for well-being in all the ways I've talked about. So our wellness promoting pathway is this one. This is what I've told you then, is that child well-being is a central concern and sacred responsibility. We meet basic needs through the evolved nest, promote health and thriving, foster heart-minded individuals and communities, and know-how for holistic, compassionate, regenerative lifestyles, maintaining connectedness all the way. So thanks very much. Here's more information. I have these books that have a lot more detail, and movies, more movies. So the order of movies here, and a lot of papers and things. So please let me know if you have any follow-up questions. And there's one more thing I'm just going to flip through the slides. I've got policy suggestions, just a sprinkling of ideas for each of these areas. I'm going to just flip through the slides and you can read them. I'm sure you have many more ideas than I. So that was breastfeeding. You could stop the show to read them more carefully. Touch, welcoming climate, play, multiple nurturers, responsiveness, and nature, immersion, and connection. Thank you very much.